Hello, everyone. Good morning from dreary Northern California, and as I would like to call it, a great day for a wonderful hot chocolate that one can drink. My name is Franklin. I'm one of the two co-founders of NorCal SCI, also known as the Northern California Spinal Cord Injury Foundation. So welcome to today's presentation on shoulder shape-up, maintaining healthy shoulders following a spinal cord injury. So as usual, a couple of housekeeping items. Number one, these presentations are made possible thanks to a grant from the Reeve Foundation. So we're grateful to them for making all of our presentations possible this year. A couple of other things, everyone has been muted, and that way we could eliminate any background distractions. If you need to ask any questions, and we will have a healthy amount of time at the end for a Q&A session, please use the chat feature on Zoom to direct your questions to me, and I'll ask them of Rachel at the end. And then finally, as we always do with all of our presentations, we are recording this, and that way if you find yourself needing to jump off the presentation or wanting to refer back to it or share it with anyone else, there will be a recording of this session that'll be in your email inbox first thing tomorrow morning. So you don't have to worry about missing a thing. So that's about it. And again, everyone has been muted, so don't freak out. You'll be able to hear Rachel. So let me go ahead and introduce her. She is a nationally certified Pilates teacher, certified strength and conditioning specialist, a movement teacher, specializing in working with people with neurological deficits, especially spinal cord injury. She's currently pursuing her license for massage therapy. She's worked with a tremendous number of athletes with spinal cord injury. So we have an incredibly gifted and knowledgeable person when it comes to the subject of shoulder health. And I know that this is a major issue for those with spinal cord injuries because we use our shoulders for everything. And unfortunately, shoulders were not built and designed for the kind of sort of pressure and weight that we constantly put on them. So we're looking forward to see what Rachel can share with you in order to have a healthier shoulder over the course of time. So thanks once again, Rachel. All yours to take on from here.
Alrighty, cool. Thanks, Franklin. And as always, thank you, NorCal SCI, for continuing to host these workshops. I've had a blast doing them, and I think it's the educational content here is so valuable to combine with the movement content. So it's been a pleasure to do these. Alrighty, let me do a screen share with you all. Okay, that might take just a few seconds to load for you. All right, great. Okay, so yes, today we're talking about the shoulders, which I know can be a hot topic with this population, given, as Franklin was saying, just some of the overuse and repetitive movements that we typically see. So just kind of a little precursor here. So today, I'm going to really be focusing on how to maintain healthy shoulders. I am definitely going to touch on rotator cuff injuries, rolled forward shoulders, some impingement, some bursitis. But really the bulk of today is just going to be how to maintain overall shoulder health, how to care for the front of your shoulders, how to care for the back of your shoulders, and what movements you can do to help with maybe some issues that you might be dealing with. Okay, so healthy shoulders is more freedom. So when we've got healthy shoulders, we can push if we're in a manual chair, we can participate in sports like you see in that upper corner, we can cook, we can garden, we can do any of those tasks that you need to do on a daily basis and or want to do. Okay, so just kind of a joke in here. If any of you or your kids or your grandkids ever used to watch the Magic School Bus, so I'm gonna screen share on a different application with you, and we're gonna go kind of inside of the human body. Don't worry, this isn't graphic, this is just pictures of the human body, but I'm a very kind of three-dimensional kinesthetic and visual learner, and I think this might be helpful for some of you. So bear with me here, and I'm going to open up a different application. Okay. And I apologize if there's again a delay on your screen. I'm going to try to move this around as slowly as I can. So I'm just going to zoom out for a second here. Okay, so we've got a nice skeleton. We're looking at a female skeleton right now. And we see that the shoulder blade sits on the back of the body. Okay, so this was developed with humans, Homo sapiens, as we know ourselves, when we basically started doing things with our hand, when we needed to pick fruit and food and all of that good stuff. We needed this thing called the arm and the shoulder and the hand to work for us. And in order to do all of this work in the front of the body, which today maybe translates to more computer and texting and driving, we needed this thing on the back of the body to help with leverage, to help with support. So we think of, I'm just going to draw some parallels between the upper and the lower body. We think of the shoulder blades as kind of part of a sacrum, if you will. And I'm going to explain that in a little bit. But you'll see, and let me just zoom in. So we're looking at the left shoulder blade right now. You'll see you've got this beautiful triangular bone that loops across the body. And then you've got this wing. Let me zoom in a little bit more. This little kind of crown right here called the acromion of the scapula. And this space right here between your upper arm bone, which is your humerus, and your acromion, which is part of the shoulder blade, this is 1 centimeter. You've only got 1 centimeter in this space when you are lifting your arm, when you're reaching for something, when you're trying to put something overhead. So if you've ever had issues like bursitis, rotator cuff tears, impingement issues, tendinitis, it's most likely that you're dealing with this tiny 1 centimeter gap where a tendon of a muscle, remember tendons are the things that attach muscles to bones, and I'm going to show you those in a second, where the tendon is taking the work that the muscle should be doing. That tendon gets inflamed and irritated, and it starts to hurt as you bring the arm overhead. That can lead to further things like frozen shoulder because you don't want to move the shoulder and all of those not so fun things. And then I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. You've got your collarbone, also called your clavicle. I'm actually going to tap out of that. Okay, so clavicle is actually the word for it is called little key, because as this arm comes overhead, so it's that one that's highlighted green, as your arm comes overhead, that clavicle rotates with you. So what we want with good shoulder health is we want the shoulder blade, the humerus, your upper arm bone, and the clavicle to all be working together in a really integrated, rhythmic kind of way. And I'm going to show you that again a little bit later. So I'm going to start to layer some muscles on so you can see where I'm going with this. Bear with me so you can, let's see, so you can really get the full idea here. Okay, so you start to see this rotator cuff kick in. So the rotator cuff is 4 muscles. You've got this one, we don't need to worry about the names. Don't worry, there's not gonna be a quiz at the end. You've got one that sits on the top. Again, notice that if that muscle starts to inflame, there's not much room. Or if the shoulder blade is getting stuck, then this muscle and this tendon is gonna start to get pinched under this part of the shoulder blade. Okay, so again, that can be a common issue if other muscles surrounding and holding the shoulder blade in a good position aren't working for you. These are 2 more of the shoulder blade muscles. Again, they can be shortened, tightened, weak. We can see a whole array of things like that. I'm just going to continue to add muscles on so you can see where I'm going with this. Oops, let's see. Okay, so we've got the triceps starting to kick in here. I'm not really going to be talking about those today, but again, just kind of a nice visual to show you. And I'm going to come more to the back here. Okay, we've got this huge muscle being your lats. We know them as your lats, your latissimus dorsi. Those come up, they attach on the arm bone. We're going to talk more about your back and your core. I'm actually going to be doing a core workshop in January. So stay tuned for when that one is going to be. But I just wanted to show you, as I layer these muscles on, look at how these muscles all are going to start to affect the shoulder blade. They're layering on top of the shoulder blade. So this is the trapezius. We've got a few parts of the trapezius being upper, mid, and lower. Okay. Those can also have a significant effect. Those attached to the shoulder blade, which is just under here, you'll see with my arrow. We've got some deeper muscles, the pecs that are all coming in and attaching to your arm bone, of course, your deltoids, all of that fun stuff. I'm going to subtract a few more muscles because I want you to see one more here. Okay, so we're on the back of the body. Again, this is your left shoulder blade. We've got something called your serratus anterior. I'm going to, again, talk about in the future, but if any of you are aware that you have a winging shoulder blade, this is one of the areas, one of the muscles we're going to be focusing on, okay? It's called the serratus anterior, kind of like, you know, how we think of a serrated knife, how it has all of those edges. And you can see this muscle has these really nice fingertips coming across, and it attaches the shoulder blade to the rib cage. So your breath also really starts to affect this area, the shoulder blade and the fascia and the muscles in this area. And then actually, no, I'm just going to point out one more thing, because I'm going to also be talking a little bit about your clavicle. So the clavicle is also really important. And let me get rid of a few muscle layers here, is really important because I'm just going to add some arteries. Okay, so arteries are the red ones, veins are the blue ones, and then I'm going to layer in your nerves. There we go. Okay. And you'll notice this sensitive area right under, let me zoom in, right under your collarbone. Look at all of the nervous tissue and the vascular tissue you have here. So this is something called your cervico-axillary canal. And this collarbone is actually helping to protect this area as well. It's giving you leverage to do things like lifting your arm, but it's also protecting a lot of important structures in there. Notice though that below the collarbone, there's less vasculature, there's less nerves. So I'm going to give you some really easy clavicle release techniques once we get to the movement portion of this class, because this is a really safe area to allow that clavicle to move as a key would, rotating down and up as that arm moves, okay? So I just wanted to point that out as well. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. We're going to pop back to the presentation. Give me one sec. There we go. Okay. Okay. So when we're talking about shoulders, we're talking about, there's kind of two, if you will, almost two ends of the spectrum, but you need those two ends of the spectrum to be working really well with each other. And that is shoulder stability and shoulder mobility. So shoulder stability is the ability for your shoulder to maintain the alignment that I was just kind of talking about with the collarbone, the shoulder blade, and your humerus, which is your upper arm bone, with control. So we're able to stabilize the shoulder, whether we're leaning against a table, whether we're holding something and reaching, whether we're lifting something overhead, we have to have the control of the shoulder joint. Okay, so that is talking more about shoulder stability. Along with that, we also want shoulder mobility. So that's just meaning that the shoulder can move through, and again, this is going to totally vary per person and per injury, but we want, I'm going to move my screen down a little bit, we want a full, as much as each person can, a full range of the shoulder blade that lives on the back of the body and the arm bone, your humerus, that lives on the side of your body. When we have solid shoulder stability and full shoulder mobility, we have something called scapulohumeral rhythm. And I'm going to get to that on the next slide. But I just want to talk you through, and feel free, I'm going to keep my PowerPoint up because I want you to see these pictures, but feel free to do some of these movements, excuse me, these movements with me. So let's start maybe with that top photo of the shoulder blades moving. So the shoulder blades have 6 directions that they move. So the first one being elevation, which is this shrug up. It's like oh, I don't know what I want to eat for dinner. Okay, so it's that full shrug of the shoulders up, engaging the upper trapezius that I pointed out just a minute ago. Likewise, when I lower my shoulders down, that whole down and back that you've probably heard me cue you through, and maybe other teachers cue you through, that's depression, where the shoulder blades are moving down. Adduction or retraction is when the shoulder blades squeeze together, like the shoulder blades are trying to kiss each other. Okay, so that's kind of thinking more of this almost chest forward kind of thing, but really I'm just trying to squeeze my shoulder blades together. You've got protraction or scapular abduction, which is where the shoulder blades, I'm actually going to take my sweatshirt off, and I'm going to show this all a little bit more in detail when we're doing the movement piece, but I just want you to move with me. So shoulder abduction means basically rolling the shoulders forward and creating that space between the shoulder blades. Okay, so pulling them together, pulling them apart. And then you have upward rotation, which is this nice movement of the shoulder blades as the arm comes up into an overhead position. And then likewise, as the arm comes back down, the shoulder blades do this movement. And I have a really nice video in the next slide that I'm going to show you of that. So again, what I'm talking about here is we want as many of these movements with the shoulder blade and with the arm, which we're going to do in a second, in as big of a range as you can, with as much stability as you can. And the idea is that if we can maintain stable shoulders with as much as a full range of motion as we can, we're going to prolong the health of our shoulders, even when we're pushing, even when we're doing all of the daily tasks that you might find yourself doing. So in that bottom picture there, you see the basic shoulder movements more coming from this upper arm bone. Okay, so we can lift the arm overhead. We can pull that arm back behind us. We can float it away from the body into more of a lateral raise. And we can pull it back in towards the body. That's your adduction. Another really important one is that shoulder external and internal rotation. I'm just showing you in a couple of different ways here. Again, don't worry, we're going to go through all of this in the movement portion. And then there's one that's not shown in this picture, but it's called lateral adduction and abduction. So just this arm moving on a horizontal plane in and out away from your body. Okay, and I just want to remind you of a couple things, and I forgot to say this in the very beginning. This is actually maybe one of the most important things I'm going to tell you about the shoulders. The shoulders don't start here. They don't start here. They don't start here. They don't start here. They start here. And right now I'm pointing to my core being my front and my back. Okay. So I'm talking today really about the musculoskeletal tissue. So that meaning the bones and the muscles of just the shoulder joint itself. This is with a huge, huge asterisk that when you're doing these shoulder movements, I'm going to assume, just for the purpose of today, because I really want to stay focused on the shoulder. Next month, we're going to focus on the core. But this is just with the assumption that today, when you're doing these movements, you first want to be in a good pelvis alignment. You don't want to, you want to try to maybe put some support behind your low back. If you find you slouch, if you find that you're kind of bananaed or side bending to one way, you want to try to bring yourself to as much as an upright position as you can. And then you can start all of these shoulder movements that we're going to be talking through. So if our pelvis and our spine is in a bad position, I can do these shoulder movements all day, but they're not going to help me. Okay. So just being mindful that being in in a somewhat good position. It doesn't have to be perfect, but in a somewhat upright position is really important because of the position that the shoulder blade, the clavicle, your collarbone, and your arm bone are all going to be sitting on top of your rib cage. Okay, I meant to say that in the beginning, but that's your big reminder. And I just want to give one more reminder here. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna say that reminder after. So talking about scapulohumeral rhythm, which I mentioned in that previous slide. So we have the shoulder blades that move in those 6 directions that we just walked through. Bringing the arm overhead is actually considered a pretty complex movement. We have to have all 3 of those bones and all of those muscles coordinating with each other at the right time. Okay, so this rhythm I'm talking about is basically the coordination of all 3 of those bones as the arm is coming out to the side and up overhead. A disrupted rhythm, meaning a rhythm that, and again, you'll see in the video in a sec, but a rhythm that maybe is choppy or doesn't move at the right pace, is a rhythm that can lead to frozen shoulder, impingement, rotator cuff issues, bursitis, all of that not so fun stuff. So again, we really want to start with the center, the proximal part of the body. Okay, we're in a good seated position. We got our spine aligned. Let's focus on the shoulder blades. Are the shoulder blades in a good position? Then we can focus on the arm moving. We can focus on keeping our collarbones open. And then maybe we'll achieve this really nice scapulohumeral rhythm. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, like, oh my gosh, I can't lift, my arm higher than my shoulder, that's totally fine, because all of these things are coming into play no matter how small or big your movement might look right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and play this video, and I just want you to watch his shoulder blades and his back and his arms move simultaneously. So you see those shoulder blades move away as the arms come up and then move back down. I'm just going to play that one more time. His arms are down, shoulder blades are somewhat together. They move away from each other. That's that upwards rotation. And then they move back down. Okay. Okay, given, yes, this is an able-bodied individual, but I just wanted to show you what I mean by this rhythm. Again, we're not necessarily going for a perfect rhythm. Trust me, my shoulders don't look as good as his. We're just thinking of how can we stabilize and mobilize the shoulders so that we lead to less shoulder injuries later in the future and we maintain our shoulder health moving forward. Okie dokes. Oh. Hang on, I might play. You get to see this one more time here because my clicker is off. Hang on one sec. Okay, here we go. All right. So one more thing before we jump into some of the movement part of today. So just a reminder, as always, that everything is connected. So the myofascial system, so this is an image from Thomas Meyer's book. It's called Anatomy Trains. If you are at all in the anatomy, geeky, nerdy world, I highly, highly recommend this book. So myofascial is this combination of muscles and fascia being this connective tissue throughout our body. If you think of opening an orange, and you peel, you take the skin off and you see the orange slices, but you see that white, it's called the pith of the orange kind of everywhere around the orange and in between the slices. That's kind of like what the connective tissue in our body is like. Let's see. Yeah, I'm not sure if someone just drew on the screen. That might have been an accident, but no. But no worries. Okay, so let's see, what was I going to say? So thinking about the connective tissue in the body is like the pith of the orange, and the muscles are kind of like the orange slices themselves. So we have these, they're called myofascial meridians. It's really just these lines of muscles that are connected by connective tissue that run throughout the body. The idea through this, and again, this slide right here is actually, I'm hoping to do a whole nother workshop on later this year. So again, this is just kind of an introduction, so I'll explain this more later. But the idea behind this is that when you have connection, so let's say you have a connection to your pecs. Notice in this picture, and what it's showing you on the skeleton that's facing us, it's showing you what's called the deep front arm line. That's his left arm. The superficial front arm line is his right arm. Not super important. The point is that if you have a connection, and by a connection, let me just click through this. By a connection, what I really mean is, do you have access to your pec? Do you use your pec to move your arms, to reach, to push, all of that stuff? If you do have access, if that muscle can work for you and you're able to engage it, but maybe you don't have access to your bicep, or maybe you don't have access to your forearm or to your hand. The idea with myofascial meridians is that you're using what you have access to, meaning your pec, in order to access through nerves and through connective tissue the areas of your body that aren't as strong, that you don't have connection to. If you have a hard time doing a bicep curl, if you have a hard time gripping something or moving your wrist in some way, how can you use your pecs and your bicep to help you gain access to the forearm part of your arm? So the idea behind this is that you're using what you have access to in order to connect to the muscles and the areas of your body that you do not have access to. So really, and again, I'm going to be talking about this more in a future workshop, but really the main point of this is, as you're doing your arm movements and your shoulder movements today, I just want you to think about, how can I integrate certain movements of my shoulders, or even certain movements of my hands, certain movements of my spine and my abdominals and my low back. How can I integrate those movements going down the line, meaning towards my hand, and going up the line, meaning towards the center of my body, in order to make my movement more efficient? Okay, so that's kind of the point of this slide. You're just trying to find a little bit more integration. A lot of us were taught in school that you have the bicep and you have the pec and they don't work together. But that actually couldn't be further from the truth. Everything is working together. So it's not cheating to use other parts of those myofascial meridians to achieve a certain movement goal, whatever that might look like for you. Okay, so coming to what might be one of the more popular slides here. So some common shoulder issues that we're going to see. Let me see if I can expand this here. Okay, so I'm just going to start with probably one of the more typical ones, being rolled forward shoulders. So for a lot of folks that are sitting in wheelchairs, this can be really hard to avoid. In prior workshops, both with myself and with Stephanie, we've talked about how to bring your pelvis and your spine into better alignment, so that your spine is better aligned, your collarbones and your shoulders are more opened. So I'm not gonna speak to that quite as much because it's been covered, and I'm gonna cover the core in January. But just to show you here, just a few examples. If you're finding that this is your typical posture, my shoulders are forward, my back is rounded, maybe my head is jutting forward because it's having to compensate for that rounded forward and shoulder spine. What do you need to strengthen? Okay, so all the things I have listed there, the thoracic spinal extensors, those are the muscles going up and down your back, kind of right along your spine. The scapula adductors, those are the muscles. Should I take my layers off? It's so cold here. So the scapula adductors are the muscles right in between the shoulder blades. They help squeeze the shoulder blades together. Remember, that's called retraction. And then finally, your shoulder external rotators. And that's this movement here. You could do with a TheraBand, you could do off of the bed, and I'll show you some of those for the movement portion as well. So it's going to be a combination of strengthening those three areas I just talked about while opening the front of your body. These muscles all right here, pecs, pec minors, let's see, that would be your, oh, I'm blanking. There's one other really big common one that rolls your shoulders forward here. If we can give a little bit of love and we can open that area up either through self-massage or somebody else opening that and doing a clavicle release for us, while we strengthen the back part of our body, it's going to be a win-win. Okay, so combining both a little bit of soft tissue release, if that's what your body needs, with strengthening of that mid and upper back, then that's going to be a good combination. Another example, a lot of my clients, again, myself included, have something called a winging scapula. And that's that photo on the far right of the screen. His right shoulder blade, you might see it almost looks like it's kind of lifted away from the rib cage, and it actually is. There's that little muscle, the serratus anterior. You remember the one where it had the finger-like little protuberances that wrapped around the ribs. So that muscle, which is all right here, and again, we're going to work that in our movement today, as well as your lower trap, which is again in this area right here in between your shoulder blades. Strengthening those two muscles are going to be game changers in helping you get that shoulder blade a little bit more attached to the rib cage. Third thing I really see a lot of is rotator cuff injuries. And with this, that bullet point under bursitis and impingement, those are all kind of in the same category. They're usually affecting the same muscles, being that of the rotator cuff. So remember, you have 4 rotator cuff muscles that I was showing you. And if you remember, there was that 1 centimeter gap. It's typically your supraspinatus, which is this top muscle here and gets pinched when we're doing some kind of an overhead movement because it gets inflamed. It's not in a good position. Your shoulders might be rolled forward. You're doing a repetitive movement with either your chair or whatever it is in front of your body. Okay, so how can we help out with maybe prior rotator cuff injuries? So we can strengthen, of course, the, actually, let me start with this. You first need to address that misalignment. Okay, so is that misalignment and repetitive use maybe coming from rolled forward shoulders? Is it coming from one shoulder hiked and the other not hiked? Is it coming from something you're doing in your day-to-day life where 100 times a day you're reaching overhead for something? So how can we first address that issue? Again, maybe that's something more in your core. Maybe that's something more in your low back. But either way, you want to bring your spine, your pelvis, your spine into alignment. And then you want to strengthen the rotator cuff. Remember, and I might have missed this. The point of the rotator cuff is to keep the arm bone attached to that shoulder blade. I watched this workshop recently where this physical therapist used an awesome analogy. She'd said, think of this. So this is a ball and socket joint, right? We've got a lot of movement in our shoulder, but think of that joint, the connection of that joint being like a golf ball sitting on a tee. There's not much surface area there. For a golf ball to stay on a tee, you would need a lot of rubber bands around that golf ball, and you would need those rubber bands working for you constantly. That's basically what the rotator cuff is doing. Okay, so just keeping that in mind if you have had those issues. Okay, so just walking through this quickly here. So kind of a recap of everything we just talked about. First, you got to be mindful of your alignment, your pelvis and your spine. all of that. You want to do movements that both stabilize and mobilize your shoulders. Yes, if you're able to, this does mean overhead positions with your arms. It's that whole use it or lose it, right? If you're not doing that movement, we're going to lose that range of motion over time. So how can we achieve that movement without pain, slowly, slowly building up to it? Do movements unlike your day-to-day tasks. If you find you're on a computer all day, or you're pushing in your chair all day, can we do more movements working the back side of your body and opening the front side of your body? Yeah, more pulling movements with the backside. Try to integrate your movement as much as you can, thinking of core, of pec area, of shoulder, of upper arm, lower arm, and hand. How can you use more integrative movement to gain access to the parts of your body, maybe the lower part of your arm, that is maybe harder for you to mobilize? Using breath to assist with movement. So if you find that every time you bring your arms overhead, this is really, really common, your ribs flare, meaning maybe you need to be working on this upper abdominal connection and you need to be working on some shoulder external rotation. So that's just an example. But, oh wait, sorry. The example being, we're gonna use breath to facilitate that. So when I bring my arm up, if I use an exhale, it helps engage my upper abdominals. So now I can successfully do the movement without my ribs jostling forward. And again, I'll be talking about that in the movement part. And then explore, wiggle, and have fun with it. Okay, so this is kind of my common theme throughout this workshop, is that you experience movement through exploration, through play, through feeling safe. So as long as there's no pain, what can your shoulders do? What feels good for your shoulders? Can you make that movement as varied as you can? If we do the same thing day after day after day, not only are we not challenging the muscles, but we're not challenging the nervous system as well. Okay, so just thinking about all of that. Okay, so let me stop my screen share. And I am going to come, give me one sec. We'll do some of the movements. So if you need to bring yourself to a better position to do some movement, or something with like a low table or a couch in front of you, then feel free to do that. Let me just get set up on my end. Okay, good. So we're just gonna start with a quick body scan and check-in here. So I'm just gonna have you close your eyes. And I want you to feel either your feet on the floor, or your sit bones on the chair, or your back maybe resting against your chair. And I want you to notice how your head and your neck are feeling right now. And maybe just keeping the eyes closed, just giving the shoulders a few rolls, noticing if there's a difference between the left shoulder and the right shoulder. Noticing if there's crunchiness, maybe you're hearing any sounds from the shoulders. Yeah, and you can settle the shoulders down, and you're just noticing how that area is feeling. Is that area easy for you to sense, easy for you to feel? And if it's not, I'm just going to invite you to think to yourself, if I could sense, if I could feel my shoulders, what might they feel like? Right now, what might they feel like sitting on top of my rib cage, sitting on top of my pelvis? You're noticing how the chest feels, how the sternum, the chest bone, how your collarbone, how that whole area feels. Remember, it's always important before movement to calm the nervous system and to check in with the body. Because if we don't have a before and after comparison, then it's kind of hard to tell if something was helpful, neutral, or hurtful. Let's take one more inhale, one more exhale, and we'll open the eyes. Okay. So I just want to start with some brief clavicle. We call this a clavicle release, but really it's just mobilizing, and you can either have somebody help you out with this, or you can use your knuckles, your fists, or your fingers. If it's easier for you to hold, and I didn't grab one, but if you have like a big cooking utensil, and that's also easy, like if I had a big spoon and I were using a big spoon to scrape across my chest, you could do that too. I'm just going to show you with my hands for the purposes of time. So I'm just kind of using my thumb here, and I'm moving from the center of my sternum, this bone here, outwards. Okay, so I'm just kind of feeling into that tissue. I'm noticing my collarbone. Okay, so you'll feel that bony thing. You can roll right off of the collarbone, and you can also pull that tissue going down. This movement feels better for me today, but if it feels better for you to do this movement pushing out towards your arm, remember again, if that means leaning on something, like if grip is kind of hard for you, you could be holding a water bottle or something on the table, and you could just lean forward on it. And you're just breathing into that area. Okay, so whatever makes the most sense for you in your seated position, you have a few options there. Okay, so go ahead and just go over to the other side, and you're just noticing, maybe is one side more tender than the other. This can be an area that is really commonly tender for people. And remember, this clavicle, even though it might feel like it's far away from the shoulder, is actually what allows our shoulder blade and our upper arm to move with a nice rhythm, especially as we get to that more overhead arm movement. Okay, you could spend 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes on each one. I even brought a little ball. If you're a floor athlete right now and you're on your belly or you're in a seated upright position, you could also just lie down, belly down on the stomach, and you could put a ball under your chest, and you would just be breathing into that. I'm just going to show you one more. Whoa, sitting on a bear canister is not the most stable. Okay, so I'm just going to show you one more area here. Is giving that area right where your pec kind of comes up and attaches to your armpit, just giving that area a rub. You can use a fist, you can use that leaning forward method on a water bottle if grip is kind of hard. If you're on the floor, you're lying belly down onto the floor. This is one of our pec minor is one of our secondary breathing muscles, which means if this muscle is shortened and tightened, which hint, hint, it is on 99% of the people out there, then it is actually going to start to affect the capacity of our breath that we're going to take. Okay, so loosening that up it can be really tender, but it can also be really helpful for our breath and for being able to open this chest. So again, for time purposes, we're not going to be able to spend too much time, but I encourage you to spend a few minutes, especially if you've had a past injury of shoulder injuries, just to loosen this whole area up, armpit to the bottom of the shoulder blade. You can't go wrong in this area. The only one thing I would say is definitely avoid putting a ball right in your armpit. There's a lot of nerves that go through there, but this area is relatively safe. Okay, so let's get to some movements. So I talked about maintaining proper shoulder health. We want to get a full range of movement through the shoulder blades and through the arms. Okay, so I kind of walked you through this again, so we'll walk through it briefly here, but we're just going to start with some shoulder shrugs. Okay, so I'm going to have you inhale to shrug up and exhale to shrug down. And as you're doing this, I want you to think of putting that inhale low into your low into your belly, if that's there for you, into that diaphragmatic breathing. Remember, one of the most common misconceptions we make about tight shoulders is that we shouldn't be working them. Okay, so this muscle, some of you might be like, ooh, but my tops of my shoulders are already tight. They already feel like I have two rocks in here. Should I really be doing this? Remember, it's really common where tight shoulders or really hard shoulders where it feels like you've got some rocks in them, most of the time means that that shoulder is lengthened, but depending on what kind of position you're in, it's either shortened or it's lengthened and it's weak. Okay, so with weak muscles, if we can restore that range of motion, we can actually help address some of that tightness or pain that you might even be feeling. And that really applies for a lot of areas in the body. Okay, next one we're gonna do, so this is gonna be still for the shoulder blades. So arms out in front of you if you can. If you're unable to put your arms out in front of you, your arms can just stay on your lap. But just so it's easy for you to see me, so arms out in front like a stop sign. Okay, so protraction means I'm pushing my arms forward, just from the shoulder blades. We're not gonna do a full thoracic flexion here. We're just pushing forward from the shoulder blades. So notice my spine isn't moving. Retraction is now pulling my shoulder blades together, pushing them away from each other, pulling them in towards each other. Okay, my arms stay in the exact same position, my spine stays in the exact same position. I'm just getting this movement in my shoulder blades. What does that feel like for you? Is one easier than the other? Is there any pain? Is there crunchiness? Okay, so you're just taking note. Good, and then relax. And then last shoulder blade movement is that upward and downward rotation. So again, if you're able to, doesn't matter how high you can go, just join me for as much as the road as you can. So arms are gonna come up overhead and then back down. And I just want you to, again, notice there before I cue you more, how it feels in each shoulder. Can you sense what the shoulder blades are doing? Or is your brain like, no, I have no idea what my shoulder blades are doing. They're on the back of my body and I can't even see them. I can't see them and I can't feel them. That is really, really common. So if it's hard for you to drop into that, you're just, whatever sensations you're noticing. Okay, I'm gonna have you keep your arms up or keep them up as high as you can. And I'm gonna have you find a shrug in this position. For those of you that have tight shoulders or rocks in your shoulders, this is an awesome exercise because now we're fully bringing the shoulders, we're fully utilizing those upper traps, which will hopefully allow them to relax, because remember, tight shoulders usually means weak shoulders. Okay, great. So let's come through some of the arm movements. So we just did one of them with the arms coming up the head, but now I want you to reach your arms back behind you. How far back do they go? And sorry, I should have said this in the beginning, but make sure that you're in as upright of a position as you can, whatever that looks like for you. And you're trying to maintain that position the whole time. Because remember, that allows the shoulders to work with a bit more ease. Okay, so you're reaching behind you. If you want to bring into that full, so this is what we call flexion. If you can even bring your arms back behind your ears, go for it. But this is full flexion and extension. We could do this with weight. We could do this with a band anchored in front of us. Again, just for ease, just because I just want to show you really the full range of motion here. I'm going to do this without weight. Yeah, that's really nice. Good. And then the second arm movement, we did this one already, but it's bringing your arms out to the side of your body. This is more of that scapulohumeral rhythm I was talking about. So I'm going to skip that one because we did that one already. A couple more. So these are like cross jacks. So bringing the arms across the body and then open. And I can choose to do that with or without my shoulder blades. If I'm doing it without my shoulder blades, notice nothing moves quite as much. If I'm doing it with my shoulder blades and I'm adding that protraction at the end and then that opening, it just involves a little bit more things. A little bit more muscles on the front and the back side of your body. Okay. Last one, and this is really important for all of my people with rotator cuff stuff out there. So I'm going to show you a few different ways to do internal and external rotation. This is probably the most accessible way. Okay, so elbows are bent. Notice that as I do this one, I'm keeping my shoulders in a somewhat down and back position, okay? So that as this arm moves through external and internal rotation, I'm not letting the whole body move. I'm just moving from that joint. Remember, this is that ball and socket, that golf ball and socket joint, right? And you're noticing, is there a difference between the two sides? Does it feel pinchy, or is there pain there? Another way to do that is to do more of a goalpost position. Notice my elbows, my upper arms are staying perpendicular with the floor. And I actually have to look for this one. I usually have one arm that gets a little bit further back. And then I usually have one arm that's a little bit better in this direction. So you're just noticing as you're doing this. And we're not doing this yet. I see some of you doing it more like this from the wrists. Really see, maybe even make a fist. Really see if you could just do it from the shoulders, whichever movement you're doing here, just from the shoulders. Try not to cheat with the wrist flicks. Yeah. Okay, let me see. Just want to make sure I'm not missing anything here. Okay, so coming more to working on some pushing movements, especially for that serratus anterior. So I want you all, I might kind of imagine this. So I want you, if you have the ability to lean forward onto a desk, I'm actually just going to lean forward onto my lap to show you an example of this. And you can also do this on your lap. You can do this on a counter, or you can even do this on the floor if I have any floor athletes out there. Okay, so just starting with protraction, retraction, but now we're doing it in a loaded position. Loading our shoulders, meaning putting weight on them, whether it means like this, or whether it means I'm holding dumbbells and I'm pressing overhead. Doing things with weight, if you're able to, can be really helpful in reestablishing shoulder health, because it allows you to stabilize and mobilize. It gives a little bit more biofeedback to your system, and it makes all of those areas work a little bit harder than they normally would be had you not been loading. Okay, I'm just going to give you a couple of options here. If that is hard enough, you were just going to stay with this, and this is what we call sternum drops. If you want to make that harder, you can start to, and you can also do this fully on your stomach. You can start to take one elbow off. Okay, so as I'm doing this, I'm taking one elbow off. Actually, maybe I'll stay facing you. I'm gonna take my dorky fuzzy socks off. Okay, as I'm pushing away, I'm stabilizing from the shoulder, and maybe I'm finding a reach forward. And I'm just oscillating. That could be a reach out to the side. That maybe doesn't even have to be a reach. That maybe can even look more like a side shift, side to side. If I'm unable to pick up one arm, I can just stay with the side shift right here. Okay, so just playing with what you can start to do with that free arm while you're stabilizing on the stabilizing arm or shoulder. Okay, and this glide back and forth, whether you're on a counter or on your lap, can be really helpful for that. Remember, the lower down you go on a surface, the harder that's going to become. I'm just going to give you one more option here. If you want to start to add any kind of a rotation, again, this is just more load. This is just more load for the stabilizing shoulder to be pushing and to be controlling you as you now rotate your spine around the shoulder joint. Okay. This can also look like, for any of my standing athletes, it can also look like leaning against a wall. Okay, so that's another option there. Okay, and then super importantly is working the back body, right? Because with a lot of those shoulder conditions, we're trying to strengthen the back body. So to hit those muscles, meaning being mid-trap being those deeper muscles in between the shoulder blades. So this, by the way, the muscle we just worked on was that serratus anterior. That's going to help with winging scapula, and then also some rotator cuff injuries as well. To bring you out of this rolled forward position, and or just to do overall back strengthening, you have a few options. You can find this lean forward position in a sitting position. If I need to use, let me put this back down. If I need to use an elbow or a hand or someone assisting me, and I'm only going to be doing the movement with one arm at a time, that's totally fine. The reason I have you leaned forward is just because of gravity and the way our muscles are working. So if we can lean forward and do something like this movement, angle myself, which is known as a reverse fly, or if I'm going to come into something called I's, T's, and Y's, where I'm moving that arm in 3 directions around me, I'm using my rotator cuff to help stabilize my shoulder, and I'm using all of those muscles, mid-trap, rhomboids, all of those muscles in between my shoulder blades to help strengthen that area. Remember, those muscles are the ones that not only keep you upright, but they pull your shoulders and back and down into a more open position. Okay, and then of course you could switch sides. If you are able to lean forward without that support, then you can just do both both sides at the same time. And those 3 positions that I call your I's, T's, and Y's are up overhead. So this one, out into a T, like you're flying an airplane, and then back behind you, like we were practicing earlier, okay? And we're just hitting different areas. We're kind of hitting upper between the shoulder blades, right in between the shoulder blades, and at the bottom of the shoulder blades as we do all of those movements. We're also getting your lats into that one as well. If you wanted to hold a weight while you do those, you absolutely could do that. I would recommend a small weight. I usually don't use more than 1 pound or 2. Your hands are also enough weight. And let me make sure I'm not missing anything there. If leaning forward is really hard for you, you have another option, and this is kind of hard for me to show on the ground, but when you wake up in the morning or you go to bed at night, okay, so imagine I'm lying down on a bed and say this is the end of the bed. You could let your arm hang off of the bed and you can do the same series out to the side, back behind you, and then up in front of you. So again, imagine that this arm is totally dangling off of the bed, okay? So you have that option to do those. You could even do your external and internal rotation in that bed position if you wanted to as well. Okay, I know I'm a few minutes over. I'm just gonna give you one more because I know I'm getting to the end of my time. So for shoulder internal and external rotation, again, I'm just gonna give you a couple options. I'm gonna focus on external rotation. That's usually what's lacking with rotator cuff injuries, with most people's shoulder issues today. So you could take a band, you could also take weights, and you can be in a lying down position. Let me expand you all here. Okay, so holding a band, this might look like something your physical therapists have given you in the past. I'd recommend taking a rolled up towel and putting it in between your elbow and your side. If you're doing one side at a time, you only have to do it on one side. I'm just going to show you on both sides. Yes, I am using my fuzzy socks as a rolled up towel. Okay, so you're holding that band. You can even wrap the band around your hand if grip strength is challenging for you. Notice I'm pulling that band and I don't even need to grip it for this one, okay? The stickiness of the band usually does a pretty good job with that. And your shoulders are down and back, and you're finding, I'm gonna bring my hands a little bit closer together, you're finding a full external rotation. Notice how slow I'm going out to the side and back to the center, okay? The key here is we're not letting the band control us. We're controlling the band. There was one more thing I was going to say with that. Again, your alignment for this one is really the most important thing. When you are working the rotator cuff, this is really important. When you're working the rotator cuff, you want lightweight and high reps. I'm gonna say that one more time. Lightweight and high reps, not the reverse, okay? Those are little muscles. They are meant to stabilize. Remember, those muscles are just holding the golf ball onto the tee. So we don't need this like heavy body lifting weight to do those. Just a band is fine. And you can also do those, I'm just gonna, giving you all of the options for seated floor athletes. You can also do those in a side position. If you're on the floor in a side position, you've got your towel, you've got good alignment, and you're doing the same thing. You could even do these in bed. And if you don't need a weight, you're just using your hand. Okay. Now that I've jumped around, let me just make sure I hit everything. Yeah, good. Let's end with that because I also don't want to overwhelm people. Awesome. Hey, thank you so much. I'll take any questions. Franklin, I'll let you jump in here.
Well, the most asked question was, where do you get those fuzzy socks? I'm kidding. Those are cute socks, and I'm sure they're going to keep you warm all winter long. Okay, we have a slew of questions. So let me start with the first one. It's from someone who's a C5, C6 complete quadriplegic. She does arm bike an hour every day, and she's wondering if that's excessive or that's adequate if she's not having any pain.
Yeah, that's a really good question. For that person, I would just say a couple things. If you're not having any pain, great. But I would also just do a check-in. How is your alignment when you're doing that? Again, right, remember we start with the pelvis and the spine. Are you in a good position? Are your shoulders in a good position? And instead of doing an hour, maybe you're going forward, can you actually bring that into going backwards? Remember, one of the things I talk about is doing movements that look different from your everyday movement. So if you find that you're having to push yourself or you're on a computer most of the day, maybe you do like 45 minutes backwards and only 15 minutes forward. Yeah, but I would say if there's no pain, really making sure you're in a good position, you feel good, and then playing more with going backwards, because remember that's going to be working back here more as opposed to doing more going forward. But otherwise, I think if it's not hurting, then that's great, that's fine. But also make sure that you're getting different movements in. So that variation is also really key. So if that means you're also doing some overhead movement during the day, you're doing some external rotation, that's important too.
Okay, so the same person, she is C5 on one side and C6 on the other side. So consequently, she has different sort of strength and ability to stretch from one side to the other. And she's wondering if she's doing any kind of work on her traps or scapula. Should she sort of fluctuate the weights that she uses based on the arm strength on each side, or should she use the same sort of weights for both sides?
Yeah, that's interesting because I get this question often in my classes. I would say that it's okay to have, especially when there's a really significant difference. When there's not a super significant difference, using the same weight is sometimes just more convenient. If there's a significant difference, feel free to use two different weights, but I would say putting your focus more on, I don't like to use the word weaker, but the sleepier side, the weaker side. So when you're doing that pressing overhead, if you've got say 5 pounds and 3 pounds, really put your focus and your mindfulness into this side. But I would say that using two different weights is not a huge deal, as long as we're really working. And maybe you do 10 and then you do an extra 5 on that weaker side. So we're still working on that imbalance, but we're addressing that this one is stronger and it can therefore push more weight.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next question, and we have a bunch of them. Would you do any additional exercises or anything different if you have fractured and plated the clavicle and if you've had rotator cuff surgery besides stretching?
Yeah. So I would say a couple things because that's so specific and because I don't know exactly where the plate is and what your range of motion is, that you definitely want to check in, because anytime we start to get not equipment, what's the right word, we start to get plates or screws of that sort, it can definitely start to impact the range of motion and the movements also, and that really goes for any joint in the body. So you definitely want to make sure you're checking in with someone who can see you in person, whether that's a doctor or a physical therapist, a movement professional of some sort. And I would also say, as a general rule, again, this is super general and without me seeing you, that if there's no pain and if the movement feels okay and if you're in good alignment, then you're probably doing okay. Everything, all of the movements, whether it was just not passive, but whether it was range of motion kinds of stuff or more strengthening stability kind of stuff, those are all really, really, really good for really all of most shoulder injuries, post injury, post surgery, all of that assumed. Right, because this is just about, we're trying to restore the full stability and full mobility of the shoulder. So anything that I gave you today, I would say is good, and listen to your body if there starts to be issues.
Okay. Next question. I experience a lot of cramping around my scapulas. How could I sort of remove or, I guess, address that?
Huh. Yeah, so we look at cramping around the scapulas is interesting. I look at, in the movement world, we say that we as teachers love cramping and our students and our clients hate cramping. What cramping is telling us, that if it's the kind of cramp that is movement associated, like if you're doing shrugs or something like that and you get a cramp up here, or you're doing something with your hands and you get a cramp in your forearm, all that's telling us is you are moving a muscle or a set of muscles in a certain way that haven't been moved like that in a long time. So it's kind of like, congratulations, you got a cramp, you're pushing yourself, you're pushing your edge. So I would say though, if that's a really common thing and that's happening for you, maybe first, of course, making sure that you're hydrated, that you're in a good aligned position, and that it's not necessary, given all of that is okay, it's not necessarily to be bad once it gets crampy, but once it gets crampy, move out of the position. So if squeezing your shoulder blades makes you crampy, come out of that position. Maybe you're giving yourself a big hug. Maybe you're using your breath to breathe into that area in between the shoulder blades. Remember, your breath stretches muscles. Your breath moves muscles, your breath engages muscles. So just sitting and breathing can help release that spasm that muscle is currently in, and then come back to it and try again.
Okay. Next question. What does it mean when I hear a crunching sound when moving my shoulder blades, and what should I do to get rid of it?
Yeah. Join the club. So I would say my rule for body sounds, especially in joints, is that as long, and I'll tell you the one version of the why behind it, but the rule is that as long as it doesn't cause discomfort or pain, you're most likely fine. If you find that it does start to cause pain or impingement in any way, you probably want to get it checked out. Most of the time, those shoulder cracks and pops and crunches are because the fascia, that connective tissue, and the muscles aren't what we call hydrated. Hydrated doesn't mean drinking water in this case. It means that that area is it's stiff and it's dry, kind of dry, because it hasn't been used in a while. So when we use a certain part of our body often, there's a fluid in between the connective tissue and the muscles that allows for this really beautiful gliding motion of the fascia and of the muscles and of the nerves in between those areas. When that area gets stiff and dehydrated, meaning we're not moving it a lot. We're asking an area of our body to work for us that we haven't asked to work in a while. And you start to hear those cracks and pops. It most of the time just means that area needs a little bit more love. Love being movement, love being a little bit of body release. Those are the two biggest things. So yeah, it's nothing to be worried about. It just means that there's the phrase motion is lotion, and that really, really applies here. So just keep moving it as long as it's not painful.
Okay. All right. Next question. I find my head protruding forwards when doing overhead movements. Is this normal, or should I be doing a chin tuck as well?
Yes. If you have the ability to do the chin tuck, get that chin tucked. It is normal. It's very common, but it's not necessarily what we want. So typically what's happening when we see that go is there's typically these muscles, and again, this is going to come with the core workshop, in a deep fascial line connect all the way down through your pelvic floor, throughout your big toes. When we lose our head connection, we're typically losing something in the deep core muscles as well. So if you're able to, so we'll see kind of this kind of a thing. If you're able to tuck that head back in so that your ear is aligned directly down through the side of your body and that head is back, you almost want to think about giving yourself a double chin. The answer is yes, definitely try to keep that head back. Yeah.
Okay. All right, next question. I'm a high-level quad, no movement in my shoulders, but always in pain. I went to an orthopedic doc and had x-rays. He said that I have pseudo subluxation and it is normal for people with SCI. Do you have any recommendations for more specific movements that I and my caregivers can do to help address this or alleviate some of the pain? A lot of times I just drop my arms to the sides of my chair to let them stretch, and that helps for a little bit, but not for long. So again, a high-level quad.
Yeah, and then Franklin, can you just read the first? They said that they had
pseudo subluxation is the condition that the orthopedic doctor had detected after the X-ray.
Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna guess that yeah, and with the high quad, anything to address. It also slightly depends where the subluxation is, but a couple things. You're good. Yeah, a couple things. I would say having you or someone else do some release work in this area can be really helpful, because it's possible that this is pulling your shoulder forward, which then can sometimes cause that that subluxation to happen. So doing any kind of release here that I mentioned at the beginning of class, and doing any rotator cuff work, and then especially your, and again, I know depending on what is doable for you, this might be more doable. I'm going to throw out a couple of ideas. Again, without looking at you, it's hard to tell, but you want to be working also your serratus anterior. Remember, that's the muscle that really brings the shoulder blade to sit nicely on the rib cage. So whether that looks like someone holding your arm up and you pushing your elbow into their hand, remember that's the protraction, or it's you, if you're able just to lean slightly forward onto a counter and do those sternum drops, that also should help with that condition.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Rachel. Ways, any tips on strengthening low traps this person finds when they're leaning forward and doing the ITY exercises? When leaning forward and doing the ITY exercises, is a rounded spine problematic?
Yeah, so I would say you want to get as flat as possible. So if that means, and maybe that means you were trying to do the I's, the T's, and the Y's with both arms. If that's the case and you were kind of like this, I would say really try to get as flat as you can. So use this one hand to help you out to try to flatten as much as you can. If that's not realistic, grab a pillow or a bolster or a couple of pillows and set yourself up for success. Okay, so as many pillows as that need, and you can do the same thing. You can also maybe have somebody holding your shoulders back, or maybe you don't just lean as far forward. If you've got a lot of big pillows, maybe it's just a slight lean forward, and then you can get into some of that lower trap work. So use as much help as you need to try to get as flat as you can.
Okay. Next question. If your shoulder is sore, has been sore for more than 6 months, do you recommend doing the exercises? And is it possible that these exercises could make a sore shoulder worse?
Yeah, well, it's possible if there's impingement, bursitis, a tear somewhere in there, then yes, doing some of, especially the overhead stuff, especially the shoulder internal rotation stuff, it's not going to help it. So I would maybe say, what exactly does sore mean? If sore means pain with certain movements that are more like overhead or more internal rotation, remember this is shoulder internal rotation, then you might want to get it checked. If sore just means you've been using it often, more often than you normally would, doing more things like that self massage, that self care, especially through the front, can be really helpful. Um, yeah, but I would say if there starts to be pain with any of that, you definitely want to get it checked. And if sore means pain, then you also want to get it checked.
Right. Okay. And a question that we always get asked, how often would you recommend doing these movements and how many reps per exercise?
Yeah. So I would say that just like we want to get a full range of motion with as many of our joints can move as possible most days of the week, I'm going to kind of recommend the same for the shoulders. So I would say if you could get, even if it is a 15-minute shoulder routine, maybe brought in with some spinal mobility that I've shown you before, where you're doing rotation or flexion extension or translations, and you're adding some arm movements and stuff like that. I mean, even 15 minutes a day, 3 days a week is going to be awesome. If 5 minutes a day, 5 days a week is more realistic for you, then that's fine too. In terms of the reps per exercise, I would say, maybe you're doing, I'm going to throw out a number, but this really, really varies person to person. But even just, and I'm going to maybe throw out more of a minimal number, but even just doing like 10 to 20 of each movement a day or a couple times a day is going to be better than nothing. So sure, I can throw out a 10 to 20 range, but it can also be half that. It can be 6 times that, whatever makes the most sense for you.
Okay. Any special considerations for these exercises for a child, a nearly 9-year-old child with SCI?
No, I would say that these are all super safe for kids. I mean, if anything, if anything, kids can teach us a lot about shoulders. And I don't know what level SCI that might be, but typically kids are, there's more laxity in their joints. And again, that also depends on the SCI. But everything that we went through today is more than safe for a kid, because their joints are meant for this kind of stuff. So whether there's an injury there or not, so definitely safe for kids.
Okay. Next question. My issue is constant discomfort in my lower left deltoid. My pec has begun to realign. My pet has begun to realign me. That seems to be helping. Any other suggestions?
Did you say the pec has begun to
Well,
realign?
the person said pet, P-E-T, but maybe they
Oh,
meant pec.
pec.
Has
Okay.
begun to realign.
Okay. And then they said that that's helping.
That seems to be helping. Yeah. Any other suggestions?
Yeah, that's interesting. Because and I would be interested in getting that checked. Pain down here can be referred pain from something closer to the body. I would say, especially if that's feeling nervy at all, numbness, tingling, burning, fire, any of those pins and needles, you definitely, there's most likely compression of a nerve somewhere up in here. If it feels more musculoskeletal, it still could be referred pain from something going on in the chest, the top of the shoulder, or the back of the shoulder blade. And that would be really hard to tell. But if you're bringing your shoulder back into a good position and that is becoming more aligned, and maybe this area is opening back up. So when you say your pec realigned, I'm just going to make a couple of assumptions. I'm assuming that maybe you went from this kind of a position to this kind of a position, and now you're experiencing less pain. Then that's great. Keep finding ways that you can open this and maybe strengthen the backside. But that's also such a general form of pain. You just want to be mindful if it's coming from somewhere else.
Okay, next, C4, C5 incomplete, labral tear with tendonitis, experiences a lot of pain. Would you say that that's typically tissue pain or nerve impingement? And how would you suggest that he go about treating it? He's had ultrasound and PT before, with obviously no success in alleviating the pain.
So if he were diagnosed with the rotator cuff tear, then, I mean, of course, nerves are always involved in this kind of stuff. But I would say that's probably most like, well, I shouldn't assume that. I mean, it could be, if you've been treated it before, maybe it's sparking up again, and I'll explain that in a second. It could also be, it could be nervy, and you're gonna know if it's nervy if those sensations I just described in that prior question is what you're feeling. The burning, tingling is anything shooting down your arm, icy, fire, pins and needles. Those are more the sensations that are going to be associated with a compressed or a sticky nerve that isn't able to glide through an area as it should be. If it is truly a rotator cuff tear, sometimes what we see is someone will tear the rotator cuff, they'll get treated, but the alignment issue isn't fixed. And if the alignment issue isn't fixed, then the same thing, the same repetitive overuse, wear and tear in that certain area is just going to continue to happen. So I would say really focusing, and even maybe getting in front of a mirror and just seeing what your alignment might look like in a mirror, maybe doing, and this goes for anyone, trying to do the exercises in front of a mirror if you are worried about spinal, pelvis, shoulder alignment. What was the other thing I was going to say? Yeah, I would say those are, I don't know if I answered all of his questions, but I would say those are the biggest things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next question. How to accommodate lack of latissimus on right side? It ends about 6 inches below my armpit, resulting also in a pelvic tilt lower on the right side.
Yeah, wait, sorry, say the beginning. How to address the lat being
Lack of
shoulder?
latissimus.
Yeah,
I don't know how to pronounce
latissimus.
it. Latissimus on the right
Yeah,
side, and it ends
yeah,
about 6 inches below armpit.
right. Okay, so I'm gonna assume a lack of your lat. So that lat was that really big, broad muscle I showed you in the body tour we did that wraps all the way around here. I'm going to assume when you say a lack and when you're describing like the 6 inches below, I'm going to assume there was nothing surgery related because that would be a totally different answer. But just assuming that maybe you feel like you have that connection, you have access to that muscle, maybe higher up, and then maybe lower down, you don't feel it. And I would say I'm really going to address that question in my January core workshop because the core and the lat work very, very closely together. But I would say, just as like a precursor to that, thinking about what I was talking about with the myofascial lines. Another one of those myofascial lines is how the lat is connected to your core and it comes across your body in this X-shaped movement. So it's kind of one lat to the opposite side and this lat to the opposite side, and it helps with our internal and our external obliques, which is part of our abdominals. So I would say whatever, going in alignment with the myofascial idea, whatever you have access to, if you feel like you have access to something up here, see if you can use that movement. So engaging the lat looks like anything where you're pulling that arm into your body. The arm can be in front of you, the arm can be out to the side to you. And I'm imagining like you have a TheraBand, you know, maybe up here or something. This is the anchor and you're pulling that arm down. It can also be like looped under the elbow and you're pulling that arm down. Okay, this is not the best setup, but you get the idea. Doing anything that will help strengthen that lat to give you more of a connection coming down into your abdominals, and likewise running down into the lower fibers of that lat is going to help. So any kind of adduction, meaning you're pulling something, bringing those arms into the body, is going to help strengthen that area. But also definitely come to that January workshop for the core, and I'm going to talk a lot more about that.
Okay. Next question. I do stretching and range of motion twice a day, yet I still have problems with my shoulders hurting. Often they are very, very painful. I don't know if you could identify the why, but probably address what she could do.
Yeah. So I'll just maybe touch to the first part of that question. Unfortunately, just stretching and range of motion sometimes for some people isn't quite enough, especially to eliminate pain. So if you have the strength, ability, connection, etc., to maybe do less stretching and more movement, more loaded movement, whether you're on your elbows or you're holding a weight or you're doing some of that banded work. If you have the ability to bring some of the stretching more into an active movement, I would recommend doing that. I can't really speak to the pain you might be feeling or anything along those lines, but I can say that we sometimes rely on just stretching, whether it's passive or active stretching. We rely on just stretching to address our pain, but if we're not addressing how the muscles are firing, especially in a loaded position, then we're not going to make much change.
Okay. By the way, that latissimus was cut during a surgery and it did not rejoin.
Oh, okay. So it didn't rejoin, but you still, hopefully, most likely, you still have connective tissue. Even if the lat was cut, there's hopefully still some of that myofascial meridian left, that connective tissue that, even if it's sitting a little bit deeper than the lat, is hopefully still making some kind of a fibril connection going in the directions we want it to go. So I would say same answer still applies, even with a cut into that lat. I would also say bringing in a little bit of body tapping and proprioception into that area, especially post-surgery with something like that. And what that might look like is you going like this. Remember, this helps with something called interoception, which is just using this body tapping, body rubbing, body scratching, whatever feels good for you, to help connect to that tissue. So studies show that when we can stimulate an area before we move it, we have a better connection to that area, even when we've had a surgery in that area. So yeah, that maybe is a more extreme example because it sounds like they cut some of that away, but I would say the answer still applies to try some of that adduction work to still work the same areas, so that we're reestablishing some of that lat connection.
Okay. Next question. How to avoid trapeze compensation when working shoulders?
Yeah, so I would say sometimes we're actively trying, and I'm going to assume you're talking about upper traps. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah.
And this is a person who's a C5, C6. She had asked a question earlier. Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, so sometimes we want to activate the traps. When we don't want to activate the traps, it's setting your shoulders into that shoulder stability. So that means I'm using the muscles on the lower part of the shoulder blade and kind of down into here, a little bit of rotator cuff, a little bit of serratus. I'm using those muscles to bring my shoulder down. Now, how far can you get this arm either in front of you or out to the side, overhead, without this shoulder shrugging up. Okay. And that's where you start. Okay. Maybe I can only get to this high and I can do it only with a 2-pound weight instead of a 3-pound weight, or no weight at all. But start in a range of motion where there isn't compensation, and then slowly starting to build that range of motion as the compensation gets better. You could also just have both arms overhead, and like we did in the beginning, doing something like this, where you're unshrugging the shoulders and shrugging up. If you have access to a gym, this is getting a little bit more wild, but a pull-up bar or a band of some sort, it's also going to be really helpful to get that motion more from a pulling standpoint instead of a pushing standpoint. So again, maybe you've got the TheraBand anchored in your door and your arm is straight, and you're doing this movement here, trying to set the shoulder blade down, and imagine this was way up high, and I'm pulling, so I've got resistance as I'm trying to pull that shoulder blade back down. That setup might take a little bit more work, but it's just another idea.
Okay, just 2 more questions. Should we always breathe in while raising the arms?
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention some of the breathing with this stuff. Use an exhale when your arms are coming overhead. If you find that it's hard for you, if you find that you're doing that, like I call it the gymnastics rib flare. You'll see gymnastics sometimes do this at the end of a movement. If you find that you're having a hard time connecting your upper and or lower abdominals as the arms lift, then use an exhale. If you find that that's pretty easy, like I can keep my ribs together, then feel free to use an inhale. So an exhale is going to make it easier. An inhale is just going to kind of fill up the lungs and the ribs a little bit more. They both have their own benefits. It just depends where you are.
Okay, promise, last question. After a workout, I'm presented with strong fatigue. How do I know if this is muscle or nerve fatigue?
Yeah, so it depends. And it also could be both, but it depends how that fatigue presents. If it's kind of, well, shaking and that stuff can be muscular too. I would maybe say muscular fatigue if you are able to like sense the area that you just worked. Muscular fatigue feels more local. I would say neural fatigue feels more global. Like it's your whole body. You might even feel sleepy. It's your whole body. You might even feel shaky, whether it's upper body, lower body, your spasms, your tone might slightly change. So looking more at the whole body system as opposed to more locally. And within the muscle, you might even be able to sense like, ooh, I just did a bunch of push-ups, and if I push here, it feels tender, as opposed to, oh my God, my whole body is exhausted. My clonus won't stop, and I feel like taking a nap. And that might be more nervous system fatigue. I would also come back with the question of, does it matter? Because either way, you're finding your edge. You're pushing yourself to the end, physically, nervous system wise, and everything. And unless that is disrupting you either later in the day, into your sleep that night, or into your next day, then I would say really any kind of fatigue just means you're pushing yourself. So if there's no negative consequences, it might not even matter.
Okay, Rachel, I hope you recognize that whenever we have lots of questions, that means that the audience loved the presentation. And as we discussed, shoulders are such a huge sort of pain of sorts of challenges and pain for us. So thank you so much for accommodating us and taking all these questions. So once again, everyone, these presentations are made possible thanks to that grant from the Reeve Foundation that we get. So we're grateful to them. We're going to send you the recording of today's session. It'll be in your inbox tomorrow morning. And then, as Rachel mentioned, next month should be another sort of a big topic, and that's the core. And we always get asked, I don't have any core. How could I strengthen my core? This and that. So just be sure to watch out in our newsletter and our Facebook groups when we make that announcement of the date. And I'm also really grateful to Rachel because she has agreed to do monthly presentations for us. throughout 2021. So we're really excited to do that. Thank you, Rachel.
Mhm.
Thank you for today. Thank you, everyone, for hanging out. I know it's a long presentation, but a lot of amazingly great questions. And I hope you all got something out of it. Have a great rest of the weekend, okay?
Yeah,
All
awesome.
right.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Have a great
Take
week.
care. Bye bye.
Bye.